Abe Morin, thank you for the super chat. How do you respond to apologists that say things like, well, Mark had a different theological purpose when it comes to no angels, wise men, etc.?
Well, he certainly had a different theological purpose. And I'm not real fond of the word theology. Let's just say he had a different story or presentation of what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. That's really line one. I'm going to leave off Son of God because that adds more theology to it that I don't think is in the early manuscripts. So if I ask Mark, what does it mean if I say Jesus is the Christ? The beginning of the gospel of Jesus the Christ. What, period. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to tell you, read Mark. Okay. So it's a story. In terms of, let me get his question exactly right. No angels, no wise men, and so forth. He obviously knows the guy is born, and he knows that he's reported to have been risen from the dead, even by the guy in the tomb. But he makes, maybe virgin birth stories haven't even been generated by this time. That's a real possibility.
Right.
Paul says he was born of a woman, which is a way of saying he's just a human being. Born of a woman is a phrase used in Second Temple sources to mean a human being. Among those born of women, meaning not an angel. So he doesn't think he's divine or anything like that. He's born of a woman. And he's declared to be the Son of God by the resurrection, according to by the very idea of resurrection, not just his resurrection, but that of the whole group, Romans 1:4. But I think for Mark, I don't think it's part of his story. I don't think he has virgin birth and earthquakes and angels coming and raising the dead. I don't think he has all the Matthew mythology, blessing Peter. And he's thinking, I'm just going to leave that out because that doesn't fit my story. That doesn't make sense to me at all. The way it always goes is you have Mark as the core, and then it gets built up and changed by Matthew and Luke in different ways. The arrow is always going that way. Remember that show we did on harmonizing the Gospels? We go through many examples of that. And so, yeah, he has a different story, which would be a different theology, a different view of Jesus. Years ago, Kerster Stendahl did a wonderful essay. I believe it was, no, it wasn't Stendahl. It was Helmut Kerster. I got my names wrong. Years ago, Helmut Kerster. Stendahl did another thing that I could talk about, but it just popped in my head wrong. So Helmut Kerster did this trajectories through early Christianity. It's a famous essay. I'm sure you've heard some of your scholars mention it. Mm-hmm. I think Elaine, actually, trying to think who mentioned it that you interviewed recently. Can't remember now for sure, but
no worries.
It's somebody that studied at Harvard. It's called Trajectories to Early Christianity. So his point was that even in the early period of the first century, this is part of the point we made at the first, don't assume everything was harmonious. Why would you assume that? There are parties and politics within the Jesus movement from day one. And these Gospels, your conservative evangelical readers want to say they're all kind of saying the same thing. That is not a careful reading. They are not kind of saying the same thing. They're kind of saying many, many things that are different. And they have to know it. It has to be self-conscious. Now, am I faulting them? Look, why should Luke, if I'm Luke, and I want to promote Christianity in the Roman world, why would I tell you that the earliest followers, the 12 we just named, were all dupes and never got anything and utterly failed and forsook Jesus? Well, I'm not going to tell you that. You see, it's motivation. I'm not going to tell you that. So I go to Luke, and guess what? They all forsook him and fled. Get behind me, Satan, all these things we've talked about. Mm-hmm. It's not in Luke. my God, why have you forsaken me? That's not in Luke. He said, well, he has a different purpose. Yeah, he has a different purpose, all right. But it's not because he thinks Mark's account is wrong. He just doesn't want to put it in. Here's the strategy of Matthew compared to Luke, rather. Matthew rewrites it and tries to keep it all, but mitigates it. You know, like don't put in the Sabbath was made for man. Just put in the Son of Man's Lord of the Sabbath. That's the main thing. Whatever Jesus does on the Sabbath, shut up. It's Jesus. He can do what he wants. That's Matthew. Now, so he leaves it out. Now, Luke has no problem with that, but he has problems with other things, right? Like, my God, why have you forsaken me? So he takes that out. So that's the tendency. But again, why do you want to read either a mitigated, rewritten version of Mark or a version of Mark where you take a lot of material out that is real offensive to other readers, and you're not getting the original story then? Did you know that Luke takes 3 chapters out of Mark? Started in 645 through 814. He just takes it out in bulk. You're going along and you have one story, and then you skip to the next verse in Luke and you go, wait, what happened to those 3 chapters in Mark? Well, nobody knows, because when they're reading Luke, they're not thinking of that. Now you go back and you come up with all these theories. People come up, maybe his copy was missing those chapters. It's just like ridiculous. Yeah. No, it wasn't missing those chapters. If you look at what's in those chapters, it's because the failure of the disciples gets to such a high pitch that Jesus finally just says, are you also without understanding? Do you have hearts that are hard? And he really dresses them down. And then he throws out a parable that Mark doesn't even interpret. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Herodians. Doesn't even interpret it. And I cover that in the course. Now you, the reader, have to go like, whoa, what does that mean? The leaven of the Pharisees and the Herodians. I don't know what that is. Well, Matthew sure doesn't know what it is. And Luke just leaves it out entirely. So.
Okay, so stop scamming, man. There's so much good stuff that the people, real quick, before you answer this, I just want to say, you can tell that James has really spent a lot of time, I mean, decades in this material. His Mark course carefully takes you through Mark as Mark. I love that you're jumping to Luke. I love that you're jumping to Matthew, to occasionally John, Acts, whatever. But this paints a completely different picture. So sign up for the course. Again, Stop Scamming Man. What should we make of the theology in Mark in regard to power leaving Jesus when a woman grabs his robe?
Well, this is there are 4 heroes or heroines and 1 hero in Mark. I won't give away the course, but one of the heroes is a male, and he's toward the end of the book, and he's commended for understanding. I'm not going to say what it is. And then we also have these women, and the story that you're alluding to, the woman that has the hemorrhaging, she touches Jesus and he feels power go from him. She's one of the heroes. As these are people that Jesus commends for their faith or for their understanding in the gospel. And they're always unnamed. They're completely overlooked. And there are 4 women. Did I say 3 women or 4? There are 4 women. One is a widow with no money. One is this woman. Another one is a woman that anoints Jesus with this perfume and so forth. And the other one is a Syrophoenician woman. So these are like, forget those stories. Those aren't important. Those are actually the main stories in Mark that are important. As far as him, power leaving him, he's got plenty of power, I guess, in Mark. When the Holy Spirit comes upon him at the baptism and he's told personally, you are my beloved son and you I'm well pleased, he's given this personal revelation. Then the next verse, he's filled with the Spirit and he's driven by the Spirit. And so this is just, it's kind of like the Moses story where a portion of the spirit Moses has can be put on somebody else. I don't think it is a diminishing, if that's what you're kind of thinking.
Right. I guess if I can butt in just to throw like my 2
Sure.
cents on what I think Stop Scamming Man, I feel like we think alike in many of his super chats. So
Right.
you find, for example, in the miracles of Jesus in Mark, he doesn't get it the first time. He's trying to heal someone and it doesn't completely work the first time. He has to spit in mud and get downright dirty. And then it slowly is working, rather in the other ones, it's,
well, not always though. I'd say,
right. I'm just throwing it out there that maybe that might be why.
I'll tell you why I don't think that works, because I'd say most of them are instant. He calms the sea, calms the wind, and so forth, walks on the water, does everything. And actually, those attempts with the blind man are very, very important in the course, because one is right before the revelation, where you start to see, but you don't quite see. That's actually you, the reader. Tabor's going to touch you with the course. There. Do you see yet? And you go, no, I still think he didn't curse Peter and he didn't call him Satan, and I'm not really following you, Tabor. Here, let me touch you again. Do you see it now? Oh my goodness, I see it. I see what you're saying. It's that kind of thing. For Mark, not Tabor. I was just saying Tabor to be funny.
Yeah, I get it.
Then right after, it's the third, there's this 3 things mentioned 3 times, and right after, he goes into Jericho and heals a blind man. And then the blind man is allowed to confess Jesus for the first time. This is okay now. You can confess him because you've been healed of blindness, meaning spiritual blindness. Now, don't assume that the disciples have been healed at that point, because they haven't. How do I know? Because when they hear about the widow, which is supposed to make you almost want to cry, this woman sacrificing, they go, Master, next verse, look at these huge buildings we're going to take over pretty soon. Man, I can't wait to get to the kingdom and rule and reign in power and glory with you. That's Mark. So they don't get it. They never get it. You see?
Yeah. Stop Scamming Man back again. What should we make of Mark chapter 3 claiming Jesus' family thought Jesus was out of his mind? Historically accurate?
First of all, there's some problems with whether it's family or not. It's actually those of his own, so it could even be townspeople. And it does say that he goes back to the house. And I do think there are some inklings here and there in all of the gospel sources that Jesus' biological family didn't go along with him. Certainly in John, remember, the outright statement that they didn't believe in him. Whether this is one of them or not, I'm not sure. But whether it's historically right, I think if some of the things that he did could maybe seem crazy to people, you know, when you say somebody's out of their mind, he's beside themselves. But because he's particularly dealing with evil spirits and demons, that's the charge in the context.
Right.
That, well, not only he's casting these demons out, but the way he's acting could even be demonic himself. So maybe he's, you know, kind of like the prince of demons, and that's why he's hooked up with Beelzebub or something like that. That's the context of the story. Was Jesus an exorcist? It seems like most of us, Paula Friedrichsen, Elaine Pagels, you know, I'm naming all your favorite people, Dale Allison, right. Bart Ehrman. I think all of us would agree, and I'm happy to put myself in their company. They would all agree. You know, we could probably say why Sanders said this. I know, just naming others that have written about Jesus historically. I would think Richard Carrier might even say it on the days when he thinks Jesus existed, that he's probably known as an exorcist and a healer. That seems to be almost like bottom line with people, because it's kind of a sociological reaction. And people who are different from the crowd and from the mainstream often would be thought by their friends, their townspeople, certainly by their enemies, to be kind of deranged.
Right.
But I think that's the context of that story.
Thank you.
Not just that the family rejected him, but people are thinking he's crazy because of this demonic thing going on.
Stop Scamming Mag's back again. Thank you for the support. In Mark, Jesus rebukes people for not implementing brutal Old Testament laws, yet also has him give the laid-back outlook on the Sabbath that it is made for man, not vice versa. Any thoughts?
The brutal Old Testament laws, would that be like not helping your animal out of the Sabbath and not healing the man with the withered hand, maybe he has in mind? Yeah. I guess you could call that brutal. It certainly doesn't, it's not having much compassion for a crippled person, right?
Right.
But remember, it's the halakhic interpretation of certain groups of Jews, Qumran included, that say you can't help an animal out of a pit. They probably also would have objected to the healing on the Sabbath. But I think the Mark 2 phrase about laws are for people, I'm going to paraphrase it as, the Torah is for people, not people for the Torah. Therefore, people are Lord of the Torah. Lord meaning would be the what? Contributing authority to decide what is right and wrong in terms of this law. We call it today situational ethics. So I don't really see a conflict there as much as a consistency that you apply the Sabbath laws. And I'm trying to think if there's other, not eating with unwashed hands. That's actually not in the Torah. Is more of a tradition in Mark 7. So if he wants to come back and clarify that, we won't charge him over $50. So.
Right. Thank you so much, Stop Scamming Man. We do have a bunch of super chats.
And this money's for Derek, by the way. I love helping my friend Derek.
It helps MythVision.
Facilitated the course. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I just,
it's for I should say it's for MythVision. It's to promote all that MythVision does. So.
Yeah, keep the education going out there. Let people hear these scholars that are in ivory tower. So Kevin Hogan, thank you for the super chat. How are Mark and Marcion Evangelium likely connected? There's no realistic way Paul could have known Mark or any canonical, is there?
Yeah, Mark is a pretty common name. You think of Marcus Aurelius, Mark Antony, so forth. We've got in the New Testament a John Mark in the book of Acts mentioned twice. Peter mentions a Mark in Timothy, which is, I say Peter. Peter mentions a Mark in 1 Peter. Paul mentions a Mark, I think, in 2 Timothy. Are these all the same Marks? We can't be sure of that. People hear Mark and there's one Mark. And so is the question whether, are they likely connected?
Mark and Marcion.
I don't see Marcion directly in Mark. I'd have to think about that. Has somebody argued that you know of, Derek?
I would imagine. Yeah, I think
I certainly think Mark has some conformity with Paul in terms of Paul saying the main thing about Jesus being the Christ is suffering and going to the cross. He does say that. And he talks about, I bear in my body the marks of the Lord, and I fill up the sufferings that are lacking in Christ. And so he's into this mark, and Jesus suffered, and if I'm going to follow him, I have to suffer. You and I did a program.
Yeah, that's
whether he thought he was the second Christ, and I think he did. And that is a suffering servant him. It's Isaiah 49. I think Isaiah 49, Paul thinks that's him. Now, in Mark, I just have to think, you're catching me off guard here. When I open it and read it, Marcion doesn't jump out at me, but I can see why Marcion might like Mark. But is this actually saying how they might have known each other or something?
Yeah, likely connected.
It could even be. I think Mark is he's got to be 100 years earlier, or maybe not 100, but 50 or so, because he's so connected to the 70 CE destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, He really is. I don't think you can move it much more than 10 or 20 years. It'd be really hard to get up into the 2nd century with Marcion. and whoever the author is. But remember, Mark, why are we even saying Mark? Why don't we just say the author of the second gospel? Because there's no reason to think that is Mark. You know, you pick a Mark in First Peter and you say, oh, he mentions Mark, who's with me in Babylon. Oh, he's in Rome. That's Babylon, and it must be the guy that wrote the gospel. So he's really interpreting Peter. That's the reasoning of Papias, an early church father, whom we have mainly in Eusebius. And Eusebius says right before that, because he doesn't like Papias really, but he likes that because he needs to explain this gospel. And he goes, but Papias is not a very smart guy. He says that.
Yeah.
He says his intelligence is severely lacking.
Wow.
So anyway, I would just, let's let them all be anonymous. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We got to refer to them. They're tags. I wish we could say 1, 2, 3, and 4, but nobody would know what we're saying.
Right.
So
Thank you so much for that.